We want to take a look now at the driving force behind the 2016 campaign, money. Friday, the super PACs, those political action committees full of cash, filed their first reports. Taken together with the reports filed by the individual candidates, they provide the first look at who is paying for the campaign. Jeb Bush is at the head of the Republican PAC. His combined totals are nearly $120 million, followed by Ted Cruz with $53 million. Marco Rubio at $26 million and Scott Walker with $20 million. Hillary Clinton has raised $69 million. Super PAC donations are unlimited and mostly unregulated. So far, 61 people and entities have given more than $1 million to the super PACs, which are on tap to flood the airways with ads, most of them negative, and finance turnout the vote operations. The trend is clear. Wealthy donors are gaining more and more influence over the campaign process. Case in point, a handful of Republican candidates this week are all in California meeting with the Charles and David Koch brothers, huge backers of Republicans, to make their case and hopefully plug into their network, which has promised to spend $900 million on the candidate of their choice. In a recent New York Times CBS News poll, 84% of the country said that they believed money had too much influence in American political campaigns. 66% said that the wealthy have a greater chance to influence elections than other Americans. Joining us now to discuss the role of money in campaign 2016, former FEC Commissioner, a Republican appointee, Trevor Potter. He is now president of the watchdog group, the Campaign Legal Center. Matea Gold covers campaign money for the Washington Post. Steven Law is the head of American Crossroads, which is a conservative political action committee. And CBS News correspondent Julianna Goldman, who covers money for us. Welcome to all of you. Julianna, I want to start with you. Every campaign we learn that more money was spent than the campaign before. That's likely to be happening again this time. But what's different?
There are really three differences here from cycles past. One is the evolution of super PACs and how campaigns and super PACs have figured out ways of working closely together without coordinating. And then they've been able to do that, and this gets to number two, because the FEC, which is supposed to police the way money is spent, is essentially toothless and dysfunctional and can't police the money that's being spent this year. And then you also have the dark money, the money that's not disclosed, that's being given to nonprofits. And we're going to be seeing more dark money this cycle. And nearly every individual candidate has a nonprofit that is associated with them. And that's what's very different this cycle.
So, Matea, we have two different animals on the Serengeti here. We have the super PAC and what people call dark money. Can you help us understand or remember the distinctions and difference between those two?
Sure, and just to step back, I think it's important to remember we actually have now two systems of political finance in our country. We have the regulated system in which candidates and parties can raise limited amounts of money that is disclosed, and then we have this growing universe of vast, unlimited contributions, often secret donations. So super PACs have to disclose all their donors. Nonprofits cannot be focused exclusively on politics, and they can keep their donors a secret. And both of those entities are now supporting all the presidential candidates in various ways, or nearly all of them. And what we're seeing, I think, in this cycle, which is so different than in cycles past, is that this universe of unlimited money is now starting to overtake the universe of regulated money.
So, Trevor, you've been worried about campaign finance for a long time, trying to fix the system. What worries you about the current state of things?
I think it's the potential for corruption, the appearance of corruption that the Supreme Court mentioned in the post-Watergate period when we first had these rules. Matea talks of two systems. I think the problem is the two systems have essentially merged. You have these enormous sums of money being raised by supposedly outside groups that are not outside in anyone's imagination.
And you mean outside, meaning outside of the candidate?
Right.
Okay.
So the legal limit you can give to a candidate is $2,700. And yet, for almost all of the presidential candidates, you see that there are groups that they have helped create, that their aides are running, that have raised many times what the campaigns have raised themselves. So that you'll see a report saying that a candidate raised, Jeb Bush, $100 million. Well, they're really talking about the super PAC, which has contributions of over $1 million. And where I think that leads is that average citizens look at this and say, well, this is a game for billionaires. It's one billionaire talking to another billionaire. Where do I fit into this?
Well, and it's not just average citizens who are making that claim. Donald Trump has built his campaign a little bit around the idea that he can't be bought. Let's listen to something he said just about this idea of who's owning the elections.
I'm not doing what's right for a man that gave me $1 million to run for office, and I owe him. And when Bush gets $100 million plus, and when Hillary gets $50 million plus, every one of those people that put up money will control Bush. Control. I don't mean like a little bit. Bush is controlled by those people. Walker is controlled by those people. Hillary Clinton is controlled by those people.
So, Steven Law, let me ask you about this, because what Donald Trump is touching on, whether you agree with the specifics of his claim, is something that we see in our polls again and again, that people basically think that money calls the tune and that it's a small group of people calling the tune. You actually have talked to people donating to groups. What does it look like from your vantage point?
Sure. First of all, I mean, I have to comment on the irony of a multi-billionaire like Donald Trump, who's self-financing his campaign, complaining about the amount of money in politics, but I'll leave it to him to sort out that irony. But no, it's true. I mean, we do spend a lot of time talking to donors. I actually talk to people on the other side of the coin, Democrats who talk to donors. And most donors, the vast majority of them, are motivated by a desire to see the direction of the country change in a broad way. They're concerned, in our case, they give to Crossroads because they're concerned about the direction of the country, a flatline economy. They're concerned about where Hillary Clinton would take the country, and they are hoping to invest in us to try to change that scenario. I read with interest some of the comments from people who had given to the Right to Rise organization. Mike Fernandez, the largest donor, says the thing he feels passionately about, he disagrees strongly with Jeb Bush on, which is normalization of relations with Cuba. So what people are doing is they're investing in a chance to change the country, and that's how they view it, and that's, again, what motivates people on both the left and the right.
Right to Rise being the super PAC for Jeb Bush, one of these outside groups that runs in parallel to his actual campaign. Juliana.
Well, it's interesting with Right to Rise, one of the data figures that they boasted was that 95% of their donations were $25,000 or less. So it just shows you where we have come from 4 years ago when you have campaigns, part of the other system that Matea was talking about, boasting of donations, of small dollar donations of $200 or $250 or less. But that is the big question this cycle, and it's what the chair of the FEC says, is that it's going to be very difficult to know whether certain candidates are taking certain policy positions, because that is what is being pushed by a multimillionaire, billionaire backer writing seven-figure checks.
You know, one thing I kind of find interesting in this vein is, you know, right now what's been going on this last week that's not been commented on is that the AFL-CIO and all of its unions are holding essentially a beauty contest for the Democratic candidates. They are sitting them all down. They're making decisions about where they're going to invest their financial support this election cycle, and they're walking through with each of those candidates a very detailed list of the policies that they want to see action on. Organized labor has always done this. They're unabashed and unashamed about connecting financial political support with your support for their policy agenda. Yet people don't seem to be terrifically concerned about that, but that is another area where there's a huge amount of money, hundreds of millions of dollars spent to advocate for a very, very particular set of policy agendas.
John, I think Steve's absolutely right. This is a bipartisan problem. It's silly to pretend that just we're focusing on Republicans because there's so many candidates running and there's so many super PACs. But both sides have this same issue. What Professor Larry Lessig calls dependency corruption, which means you're dependent on the people who finance you. And it used to be we had a broad base, we had a presidential public funding system, you got small donations, they were matched, you got presidential public funding in the general. That's who Ronald Reagan was elected by twice. Today you've got a tiny group of people. In 2012, 90% of the contributions to these super PACs came from 523 people. These candidates become focused on the support of such a tiny group of people, which is so important because these super PACs are raising far more money than they're going to raise. And the result is when they get into government, you know, who are they going to take a call from? Who are they going to listen to?
Matea.
So I think what's important to focus on as well is not just what donors think they're going to get for their money, but how it's changing our politics. The role that big donors are playing in 2016 has already revamped the entire political process. We saw candidates hold off announcing their candidacy so they could actually work in closer coordination with outside groups and super PACs so they could raise and ask for huge sums of money. And we're seeing them focus their attention really on the tiny, tiny group of people who can afford to write 7- and 8-figure checks.
So one of the ways it's changing the system is the Koch brothers are having a gathering that Republican candidates are going to, and so they're spending their time pitching to what's been called the Koch primary, right?
Yeah, and this is an opportunity to voice their policy prescriptions for small, limited government, and it's an opportunity for the network of donors to hear from them directly.
Any candidate who spends all his time just focused on donors and what they want will not succeed, because ultimately the people who cast the votes and determine whether you're the nominee or the candidate are the voters. The donors, the financing of campaigns by whatever means is a means to an end. It's an amplification system.
Another way it's changing the way politics takes place is primaries are lasting longer because candidates can live. It used to be you got knocked out when you ran out of money. That's no longer the case.
So what's so dramatic this cycle is that nearly every single presidential candidate has a personalized super PAC. We saw the beginnings of this in 2012 and the impact that had. And Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum both had their candidacies kept alive by wealthy donors who gave through a super PAC. And arguably Mitt Romney really was able to last through a very long, bloody primary fight because he had a very well-funded super PAC behind them. Now everyone has a super PAC, and in fact, 4 out of the $5 raised to support Republican candidates so far have been raised for outside groups. So we're looking at the prospect of an incredibly long, drawn-out primary fight again, because you never know who's going to be able to get a second wind if a donor decides to write a big check.
Great. Then the money that we're going to be seeing this weekend, these are essentially down payments. You know, it used to be that when a candidate runs out of money, they have to drop out. Now it's when they run out of their sugar daddy or their sugar mama who's funding their super PAC.
We used to have the two systems we've been talking about. You said they're melding it into one. There used to be a cop on the beat, the FEC, that would kind of try and keep those two systems apart. The cop's not on the beat.
Well, the chair of the FEC has referred to the commission as worse than dysfunctional. When I was on the commission, I think there was one vote where we tied 3-3 in the 5 years I was there. Now that essentially happens all the time, and the result of that is the commission, which requires a majority, 4 votes to do anything, is deadlocked, gridlocked, paralyzed, and not able to deal with complaints that come in. And so I think what's happened in the political world is people have said, well, you know, no one's going to go after this anyway. It always took years, but now it's just not going to happen. And so you've ended up in a situation which clearly the Supreme Court didn't intend. And Citizens United, when it said corporations could spend unlimited money and basically said this independent speech is a good thing, they said it's going to be fully disclosed, which it has not been. We have the dark money you pointed out, the secret money that goes in, and that it would be completely, wholly independent of parties and candidates. And it's not. These are groups that are visibly set up. There's an argument that they will make, well, I set it up before I became a candidate, or I'm not actually
and this is the super PACs.
The
I
super
set up
PACs,
the super PAC
correct.
before I was a candidate.
And then these other groups. So the FEC is essentially now out of the game, and the result of that is people are pushing the lines, and when a candidate sees someone else doing something, they dive in and do it as well, because they don't want to be at a disadvantage.
Any chance for reform or change of this system, Matea?
Well, one thing that I find so striking is that campaign operatives and campaign finance attorneys you speak to on both sides of the aisle today actually are in agreement. The system is not working. The center cannot hold. There is a direct conflict between these huge sums of money on one side and these very small limited contributions on the other. So the question is what direction it goes in. And if you talk to advocates for stricter campaign finance rules, such as Mr. Potter, a lot of people are saying, well, this is going to lead to such a big scandal that there will be another sort of reform movement. Watergate led to the creation of the Federal Election Commission. We saw the Clinton soft money scandals led to the McCain-Feingold Act. I do think it's possible, however, that we could see a push to big money coming back to candidates and parties. That's something that Republicans have been advocating for, and if Republicans take Congress and the White House, we could see that come to pass.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Sorry, Trevor. We'll get on this issue again. Thanks, all of you. And we'll be right back.